All right, welcome back to the last topic within this topic. Okay, we're going to talk about what directions performance appraisal is moving in more modern times. There's been more of a push toward, in fact, take a look at this under my head. Early researchers focused on rating scale formats and believed that accuracy was the primary goal of appraisal. All right, contemporary research emphasizes the social context. So, in other words, there is a recognition for social psychology and that the individual raters are not sitting in an isolated world. The individual raters are not sitting in an isolated world. Okay? And so there is a social psychological climate in which this appraisal occurs. And so we need to understand this context better. So we're going to talk about different aspects of the social psychological construct. Okay? So we'll talk about here reaction criteria. The rater and the ratee have reactions to the performance appraisal, and their reactions are, in fact, very important. In fact, the reactions by the raters and ratees is probably a better indicator of the viability of a performance system, a performance appraisal system, rather than accuracy, and that's kind of crazy. And so we find this reaction is it can include satisfaction, perceived accuracy, motivation to use, and anger, etc. So reaction criteria is an interesting avenue of research for IO psychology. We find one aspect of reaction criterion is this notion of goal, feedback, reaction, subsequent goals, a lot of words. But the idea is the emotional reaction one has to feedback plays a huge role in determining future paths and goals. And so if people perceive their reaction to the feedback is negative, they may well not take that feedback and implement it to improve their behaviors, something like this. Or the Dunning-Kruger Effect. I love this one. Cognitive biases that suggest that some unskilled individuals overestimate their abilities and do not have the metacognitive skills to realize that they are, in fact, overestimate. I suspect we all overestimate our abilities. So this Dunning-Kruger effect could pretty much be any of us. But those individuals that are unskilled and unaware are also those that are most uninterested in learning and getting better. In other words, they're the ones least likely to take that feedback and use it for improvement purposes. The relationship between supervisor and subordinate is incredibly important. So leader member exchange idea. Supervisors have different relationships with different subordinates, and yet they evaluate all of them. And so the relationships can affect the performance appraisal process. And so if you are, say, for example, you and the manager, your children are on the same soccer team or something like that, then the manager is more likely to rate that employee in more favorable ways just because their kids play soccer together. Okay? And so it can be a real problem how this other relationship aspect can influence the performance appraisal process. Organizational politics. Yeah, organizations are political entities and self-interest. Individuals make deliberate attempts to enhance or protect their self-interest. And so, what might happen is the manager might hear from above them, we need to cut back. Oh, really? Okay. In order to protect my job, I need to get rid of 5 of them, right? And so clearly these politics can play a role in subordinates often use impression management, for example, is another aspect, and that is that and by the way, impression management is a major social psychological idea that we control our behavior, that we are inherently paying attention to what others think of us and changing our behavior to fit that. And so it gets in the way of accurate performance appraisals. Trust, okay? Raters need to trust that the ratings will be fair and accurate. Their appraisals will be fair and accurate. It really relates to the trust they feel in the management. If the process is trusted, it's going to be utilized more effectively. Of course, Because as we said, any feedback system, if it is not used for future improvement, is really useless. Well, this interesting trust issue, this is related to some of the research I do. Turns out managers that they are going managers that have job security, they feel comfortable in their jobs, will give accurate appraisals that are beneficial to the long-term functioning of the organization, even if the appraisals are painful and make them unpopular. Managers who feel less job security, who don't trust in their future, are lenient. They give appraisals that'll keep the peace in the short run. This is related to self-control and social cooperation in a lot of ways, so my primary research area. But it really is to say the self-controlled option for the manager, or the difficult choice, is the one where they give accurate feedback that's unpopular, but that's the one that's actually useful to the long-term functioning of the organization. And managers that don't trust that they have good job security tend to give impulsive decisions, which are ones that make people happy at the moment, but those really don't help the organization in the long run. And so it's really quite a powerful idea, this trust, both the trust the employees have, but also the trust the managers have. Where was it? What? Hello? Gotta give me a moment. I'm old. Okay. All right. Justice. If raters or ratees see the process as unfair and biased, it doesn't matter if it's accurate if they think it's unfair and biased. We find that this notion of implicit person theory, it's whether or not an individual thinks that people can change, okay? In other words, supervisors that believe people can change. So if an employee got a bad performance appraisal last year, that previously bad performance appraisal should in fact be independent and should not be brought up this year. This year's performance appraisal is based on this year's performance. And I, the manager, believe that those employees can change. Those that had bad appraisals last year may well have good appraisals this year. And so supervisors that have this notion are perceived by subordinates as much more just and fair in their appraisals. Participation. This is interesting. We sort of already talked about it in 360-degree feedback. But what we find is that when employees participate in the appraisal process, right? If the employee has no say in the appraisal process, they are just like helpless victims. And helpless victims, by the way, again, this goes back to social psychology. People that feel like they're helpless, that don't have control, will often emerge with learned helplessness. And learned helplessness leads to some self-defeating behaviors. Well, people that view themselves as having an active role in the process will view the process as more fair, just, and are far more likely to actually use the feedback results for future change. Perceived system knowledge, okay? And this is interesting because many companies have appraisal systems that are really mysterious, okay? I've seen some of these appraisal systems that perhaps they use words in the appraisal system that the average employee doesn't understand. I mean, they're using vocabulary that they don't get, and so what happens is some employees just don't understand the appraisal system. They're like, I don't get promoted and I don't understand why. What behavior could I possibly exhibit that would allow me to get promoted? And so it's an important, a newer component of the research in performance analysis. Oh my gosh, how to perform a performance analysis, conduct a, that looks like a fun one for you to read. All right. Performance appraisal in the law. Yeah, this is a big deal. Obviously, in the U.S., you cannot discriminate on the basis of non-performance factors. In other words, if you have a performance appraisal and somehow you're firing old people, not because they're performing worse, but because they're old, yeah, you're in trouble, okay? So in lawsuits that involve it, judgments for the organizations, and we'll just, in fact, I have a better description on the next slide, but here's 8 legal recommendations for all HR departments. you always start with the job analysis. Did I not tell you that in topic 2 and in topic 3 and repeat it over and over and over? The job analysis is the central point upon which the entire field of organizational psychology is hinged, right? Or was it the industrial psych? Whatever. The entire thing is hinged on job analysis, okay? You should communicate performance standards in writing because verbal things tend to be miscommunicated and misremembered, okay? In other words, document, okay? Recognize separate dimensions of performance. Don't just say, oh, good employee, bad employee, because you're going to get in trouble for that. Have very specific behavioral categories or dimensions of performance. Use a combination of objective and subjective judgments. Provide an appeal mechanism for people that believe that they are not fairly rated. Give an appeal. Use multiple raters when possible. That's an important dimension right there. Document, and train the raters and provide the raters with written instructions. Okay? And so court decisions, they looked at different court decisions and they found that courts sided with the defendants, in other words, the companies, if a job analysis was fundamentally used as a basis for performance appraisal, if written instructions for performance appraisal are clearly written, if employees have an ability to review their appraisals rather than keeping them secret, whether multiple raters agree on the ratings, inter-rater reliability was high, and whether rater training was used. Okay? And so when these 5 things have happened, the courts tend to side with the companies in these cases. All right, so that's what we have today for topic 5. And so we'll see you next time for topic 6.